Are we ready upstairs, Tanya?
We're ready.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the October 5th, 2023 meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with request to speak cards. A reminder to everyone that requests to speak cards should be completed and turned into the clerk prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write item 1 on your card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. Okay, with that, we will we'll do the pledge. Commissioner Linker, will you lead us in the pledge? Turning to General Administration Function Part 1, we have Item 1, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission.
We have no request to speak on this item.
Okay, thank you. We have Item 2, correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commissioner Secretary.
No communications tonight.
And then disclosure of ex parte communications. Any commissioners have anything to disclose? Seeing none. We have the consent agenda. Item 4, consideration and approval of the minutes from September 7th, 2023 meeting. Any corrections on the minutes? Can I get a motion to approve?
All motion.
We have a motion by Commissioner Olivares
I'll second.
and a second by Commissioner Delgado.
Commissioner Linker? Commissioner Wong?
Aye.
Commissioner Delgado?
Aye.
Commissioner Olivares?
Aye.
Commissioner Squires?
Aye.
Vice Chair Jackson?
Aye.
Chair Sablon?
Aye. Okay, with that, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Turning to our public hearings, starting with item 5, we have the public hearing regarding tentative parcel map number 5243 at 2528 West Capitol Avenue. We have Mr. Tilley.
Yes, I'm going to do this one tonight. It feels fun to do a small one like this. It's been a while. So before you tonight is a proposed 2-lot parcel map on a property on West Capitol Avenue. What's at least somewhat unique about this property is it fronts on West Capitol Avenue, but also has frontage on Evergreen as a north-south orientation. And the property is more or less split in north and south half by actually how the properties are zoned. It's a mixed-use commercial zoning on the north half and then light industrial on the south half. The south part of the property is presently developed and in use. The north half is currently vacant. So the applicant is proposing to split it almost into a 3-acre and 2-acre parcels approximately to allow for future flexibility, particularly for the vacant portion of the property that has frontage on West Capitol Avenue. Staff is supporting this project tonight. However, there's probably one area of discussion for the commission, and that is utility undergrounding. This is something that the commissions over the years have grappled with, as well as staff over the years in different contexts. So in the staff report, we tried to provide a little more background on that for your consideration, especially since this particular topic came up a few meetings ago, and it was clear we struggled a little bit because we didn't provide you with as much information as we should have, in hindsight. So the default in the city's municipal code for any type of land division would be that overhead utilities would be undergrounded either at the time of site development or prior to recording with the final map. The Commission, however, does have the explicit authority to waive that requirement if it based on the certain criteria that are in the city's municipal code. So this is a topic that we've definitely grappled with at the commission over the years. Generally speaking, I feel like most people would generally prefer lines to be underground, versus overhead from an aesthetic standpoint. But also in more recent years, we've been looking at it from a resiliency standpoint. There's no doubt that the areas of town that remain having overhead lines are more vulnerable during winter storms and other high wind events than those areas where overhead utilities are actually underground. So in this case, following the city's municipal code, our city's engineering group has included the standard condition of undergrounding unless waived by the Planning Commission. I believe that's condition number 10. As part of your packet and as part of our analysis project, we asked the applicant's engineer to provide an analysis and estimate of what undergrounding would really mean for a project of this in this location and orientation, and what the approximate cost of that would be. And that was something that our own engineering staff then vetted and did find to be a reasonable estimate of the scope of work for undergrounding and what the cost would be. So we do anticipate tonight that the applicant or his or her representative will request tonight that that particular requirement be waived. So in this particular case, the undergrounding, which would be well north of about $360,000 on waiving on doing the undergrounding work in this particular area, which again our engineering staff believes is a reasonable estimate as provided by the applicant's land engineer. Utility undergrounding would be ideally done in a much more comprehensive way. It's not always an option. PG&E is very busy undergrounding. However, they're working in some of the high wildfire areas, perhaps as they should be, to try to protect those areas from some of the big wildfires that we have had over the last several years. So it's unlikely that undergrounding would occur other than through development such as what's proposed tonight. But we still have to consider that this is one parcel, currently one parcel. We cannot, compel them to, underground the whole block or all the way down to the corner. It really would be just what was involved with their frontage. So we do expect to have some discussion on the undergrounding topic tonight. Putting aside the undergrounding, staff believes all the recommended findings can be made. This is a 2-lot parcel map in a more commercial context. So there's not any residential considerations here. It's just merely a 2-lot map. Zoning remains the same. Allowable land uses on the mixed use side will remain the same, and then as well as on the light industrial side. So we look forward to the Commission's discussion on this one. Should the Commission ultimately decide to waive that requirement, we would want to include in any motion that particular condition be stricken. Other than that, staff does recommend approval of this project as presented in front of you in your staff report tonight. And this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. And did you say the applicant has a presentation on this today?
I believe they are prepared to come up and make some comments when we get to that point.
Okay. Do the commissioners have any questions at this point? Commissioner Squires.
So normally, how does this happen? I believe it says that the owner desires to divide the property, but there's no plans to sell it to anyone in particular. And so when does the undergrounding usually happen? At the point of dividing the land, or at the point of someone starting a business there?
Typically with a parcel map where you're going to create between 2 and 4 parcels, that would occur at the time of site development. It could occur prior to that, but the typical way would be when someone would want to come in and build something on the new parcel, the vacant parcel, that undergrounding would be applied at that time.
Okay, so but the requirement normally is that when the property is divided, then it happened then. Is that correct?
Well, if we were talking about a subdivision, when you have 5 lots or more, typically those kinds of improvements would occur before they would record the final map. Because when the final map is recorded, that is what actually effectuates dividing the property, formally and officially. So, but in a parcel map situation, when we're talking about between 2 and 4 parcels, typically would be when the parcels are built on, which, could be any number of years. In a final map situation where people have 3 years to record that, typically that would occur within those first 3 years. And on a parcel map, it would be whenever that site happened to be developed.
So if we decide to waive that requirement tonight, it could be picked up later when someone builds on it?
No, if you waive it tonight, it will not happen.
Okay.
Just related to that, Mr. Tilley, if we decide not to waive it tonight, could they come back to us at the time of development and ask for the waiver at that point?
No, the waiver is tied to the land division, and our authority to require the undergrounding is tied to the land division. So this does need to be decided once, as part of your decision on the land division that's before you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions from Vice Chair Jackson.
Yeah, now I know there's been quite a bit of infill development that's taken place down the West Capitol Corridor over the recent years. How many of those properties have asked for and received a type of exemption that's been requested here?
Most of those sites have not required any type of land division like is proposed tonight. So that requirement would only come in if those utilities were like literally in the way of where they wanted to put a building or some other improvement. I can't recall the last time we saw a parcel map or subdivision map on West Capitol. I'm sure there has been some over the years, but there certainly hasn't been anything recently that I can recall. Most of those projects have been built on parcels that were, as existing and developable in their current form.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have more questions for you when we come back, Mr. Tilley. And Ms. Flores, do we have public comments on this?
We have no request to speak on this item, but we do have David Green, who is the applicant, I believe.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing and hear from Mr. Green.
Good evening. My name is Kerry Franich. I'm the applicant. My engineers, David Green and Javed Siddiqui, are here with me. I anticipated you'd probably have some technical questions that are outside my expertise, so I brought them just to make sure that everybody's questions were covered. But if it's okay with the commission, I thought I'd just make a quick synopsis of what I think the situation is and sort of my take on the request for a waiver of the undergrounding, if it would be helpful to the commission.
Yes.
So just for context, this parcel has been in my family for roughly 30 years. The side of the parcel that is in question has been vacant for approximately 4 years. There's 2 challenges that we've had in leasing the vacant side out. First, as Mr. Tilley's report explains, it's unimproved. But second, the zoning of that side of the parcel is quite restrictive. So we've been trying to find a tenant for roughly 4 years, and 90% of the calls that we get are like heavy trucking companies whose use is clearly incompatible with the zoning. So one of the reasons we're here tonight is we just kind of decided the status quo isn't really working. 50% of the lot is not being used. So this is sort of the compromise that we thought made sense, is trying to split it into 2 and sell it off. Now, just by way of background, I'm not a developer. I don't have the capital to improve the property myself. I don't have the expertise. I live in Southern California, 400 miles away. So if the waiver is not granted, then the property is just going to stay vacant because I don't have the ability to pay $360,000 to move the utilities underground. But I guess one question that I had for Mr. Tilly after reading his report. My understanding was a little different. In approaching this evening, I thought to myself, well, maybe we can get the waiver now. I could put assuming the lot is split, I could put the property on the market in 2024, sell it to a developer who does have the capital and expertise. And when they want to build something and they come back before this commission, then your team could say, okay, now it's time to move the utilities underground. I thought that if I'm reading Mr. Tilley's analysis, I thought a waiver this evening would have no precedential effect. But if I understood Mr. Tilley's comments, it sounds like maybe that I'm misunderstanding things. So I think I may need a little clarity on that issue. But I guess the long and short of it is, from my standpoint, the property is not being put to its full use right now. And this is sort of like a sensible way that I thought we could sell it off to someone who does want to build it. Because we get inquiries all the time. They're usually people who want to build condos or apartments. So that's kind of it in a nutshell from my standpoint. If the commission has any specific question about the logistics about undergrounding, my engineers could speak more eloquently, I'm sure, about that. I'll pause there to if the commission has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Commissioner Squires?
So you don't need to divide the property in order to sell it, right? You could sell it as is right now, right?
No, because I don't want to give up the DMV. They've been there roughly 30 years. We have a long-standing relationship with them. We just renewed their lease. So if I sell the property, then I have to let go of the DMV. So that's why I thought, the sensible thing would be to split the property in two. I could keep the DMV and then sell off the vacant side to someone who has the capital and the expertise to put, apartments there or whatever use the city would think would be good there.
All right.
I mean, legally, Mr. Squires, you're right. I could sell the entire parcel. I'm telling you now, that's not going to happen.
Okay. All right.
That's Commissioner Linker?
You pretty much answered the question that I would have had, was the inquiries that would be interesting. So primarily, it was trucking that can't.
For leasing it, sorry.
And then apartments or condos or stuff.
Yeah. I mean, to be candid, they've pretty much run the gamut. A lot of them are trucking related, which I don't think are compatible with the zoning. We've had a few inquiries about alternative fueling stations, like hydrogen stations. And I don't even know if that would, Mr. Tilley would know better than I if that's compliant or not. That never really ripened to any serious conversation. But more of the recent ones are more residential in nature. Any other questions?
So I have a question. So you said you were under the impression that if we did the waiver tonight, that when it was purchased and developed, then they could be required to underground.
So specifically, I'm looking at page 2 of the report that Mr. Tilley prepared. Under the analysis, in the second paragraph, it says, quote, "A decision made by the commission would not represent a precedent that all future utility undergrounding should be waived." So I interpreted that to mean I sell the property in 2024, developer buys it, developer wants to build something, comes back before this body, and then I thought that was the appropriate time for the commission to say, okay, now we're going to move all the utilities underground as a condition to you being able to build XYZ building. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that understanding is correct or not.
Yeah, I think what he meant was that, or what the staff report means is that if we decide to waive here, another similar parcel wouldn't be subject to the same waiver. Like we could still make a different decision on other parcels.
Okay.
But what I was trying to get at, though, is if we didn't waive it, you could sell it with that burden on there of you need to underground, and then they would still need to do it. Like, you wouldn't have to underground it yourself. The developer that was my understanding of what Mr. Tilley said, is it wouldn't need to be underground until development starts. So that would still work in the same way as you thought it could work with the waiver.
Yeah, I suppose Mr. Tilley would need to confirm, because I think you're right. If the tentative map is approved and I'm able to sell the vacant lot separately, subject to a condition that if they develop, then they have to underground the utilities, I think that would be fine by me, as long as it's still a separate lot and I don't have to sell the entire parcel.
Can I get some clarification on that? Mr.
Sure.
Tilley?
So if the parcel map goes through and is ultimately recorded and thus official, and this applicant now has 2 lots that are wholly separate, and he can do whatever he wants with each one independent of the other, then if this requirement was still in place, perhaps he would, sell it to, I don't know, apartment developer as an example. That apartment developer then would have that obligation to underground. But what's important about this is that the map that's before you is the authority under the city's municipal code to require the undergrounding. So the decision to underground or not to underground does have to be made with the map, even though the actual undergrounding itself would not have to occur until such time as the vacant parcel along West Capitol would be developed.
Okay. But he could still sell it?
Absolutely.
With that, okay.
And absolutely. And so if he sells it and then 10 years from now, somebody wants to build something there, they would need to underground. So this particular applicant would not, unless he developed it himself, would not be obligated to perform the undergrounding himself.
Okay. And you said you're comfortable with that?
Well,
Yeah.
if that's, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's not my preference, because I'm sure it's going to impact the market value of the property, but I understand that's not the commission's priority. The commission's priority is getting these underground, and I agree the policy is sensible. I just don't have the dough to do it myself,
Right.
so.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Or did you have questions, Commissioner? Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Javed Siddiqui. I'm with JTS Engineering. I just had a question that this condition about undergrounding, can we record the map without satisfying this condition?
Candido. Candido Ramirez, he's with our development engineering group.
The answer is no. Isn't waived. The map gets approved.
Oh, can you come up to the mic so we can?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So the answer is no. If the condition stays on this tentative map, an approved tentative map, it has to be recorded with a map as well. Because the potential new buyer needs to be aware that there's a requirement
Okay.
to underground the utilities.
So, but it can be recorded with the requirement,
Yes.
with the requirement, but the requirement doesn't need to be done before it's recorded.
My question really is that when we file the map, we can put the note that each parcel would be responsible for undergrounding, but we're not going to get a contractor to underground it before the map reports. As long as there is a note, I think we are okay. But I just want to make sure that we are not going to have to hire the contractor to do it. And the map could be recorded with the note on the map, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So to clarify, the map could be recorded without the undergrounding having been performed. However, it would remain an obligation on the parcel to be undergrounded at the time of site development.
Apologies. Can I ask one question?
Yeah. Yes.
This may be more suited for Mr. Tilley. I guess the one thing that just occurred to me is if I'm a developer and I buy the property with the understanding that the utilities have to be undergrounded, when this condition is set with this parcel map we're proposing, is there some flexibility for a developer to underground them in a certain way that's compatible for an apartment complex, for example, versus a gas station? Or is there, I don't know if that question makes sense. Like, have we reduced to writing the specific way the utilities must be underground? I'm wondering if that may limit the buyer's options.
Yeah. The typical requirements would be to underground the utilities across the property's frontage. So the type of site development really wouldn't matter in that case because it would be going across the property frontage. So whether it's apartments or a gas station or a hotel or whatever, the requirements would be essentially the same.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other speakers on this? No.
We have no other requests to speak on this item.
Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Commissioner Squires.
Yes, Mr. Tilley, you talked about the undergrounding along the frontage on Evergreen. What about the property line stretching, the line of poles, overhead poles from stretching from Evergreen to Capitol Avenue?
Yeah, as the condition from the engineering division reads, it's really all overhead utility lines within the subdivision boundary. So this really would be extending, on site as well, but it's really within the boundaries of the map.
Are there existing overhead lines on the DMV side that would need to be underground?
So since the DMV site is already developed, if the other parcel is purchased separately and developed, the requirement to underground the utilities would only be on the undeveloped parcel. It wouldn't extend beyond the boundaries of that parcel.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Olivares?
Thank you. I had a question. When do you plan on selling this parcel? Should the map be approved? Do you have someone in mind?
I was hoping 2024 sometime. I don't, this is the first time I've gone through this, so I don't really know what the time delay is. If we get your approval now, I don't know when the map records, but 2024 is what I had in mind.
Okay. Do you already have potential buyers expressing interest? And have you been in discussions with potential buyers, making them aware of this requirement that the city of West Sacramento encourages in response to the?
No, thus far, every time, so right now it's on the market for lease, and every time we've gotten an inquiry from someone who wants to buy it, we've responded, sorry, we're not selling because the owner doesn't want to let the DMV go. So we haven't divulged that a lot split is in the works because I didn't know whether it would be approved. But if it's approved, my hope is that I'd put it on the market in 2024 sometime.
Thank you. Any discussion from the commissioners?
I had one follow-up thought, and I thought you asked a really good question, Chair, in regards to the existing underground established already on the DMV side. And just by way of transparency here on the dais, I was the commissioner that motioned waiving the underground requirement at our May 4th meeting. However, I felt that the circumstances in that applicant and developer's explanation resonated more, and I think it was because the owner was occupying one of the parcels. I'm not sure if you guys recall that particular meeting, and I think the collective facts that were brought before us, as well as the applicant's plans and the work that they had done to kind of secure that comfort for me, it has me challenged to motion in the same way today. And I don't know if we've asked enough questions to bring comfort for me to want to make the same motion that I did back at the May 4th meeting.
Commissioner Delgado?
So I was on the other side of the debate at the previous meeting. However, knowing West Cap and knowing kind of the development and the situation as it stands, I think a lot of those existing parcels have probably no intention of undergrounding anything anytime soon. So the resiliency standpoint is fairly minimal, as well as the, what would you call it? The aesthetic value of undergrounding seems minimal in this situation as well. So to that point, I will end that comment.
Commissioner Squires?
Yeah, I feel that since we're called to, it says the city shall promote the enhancement of the overall quality of development along West Capitol Avenue, and since it says the city shall actively promote the undergrounding of existing overhead utilities, facilities, I feel like the undergrounding should take place. We should not give the waiver. That's what I'm sensing.
Vice Chair Jackson?
I guess I'm looking at the map here again. It appears as though most of the overhead lines on this lot run, I'm looking at the map correctly, is that up to on the western side? Along the western side of the lot? Which looks up here, then there's an overhead line that kind of goes towards comes towards the middle of the lot. Am I reading that correctly? This one.
I think Mr. Ramirez can help inform on that.
Yeah, let me just clarify. The underground, there's I think it's 25 kilovolt lines that run north and south along the east side of this current parcel.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cost estimate also includes undergrounding underneath West Capitol to the north side. So it's that's where the electrical overhead is currently.
Okay.
While you're up here, what's the net pole loss with the undergrounding?
5,
So we'll lose 5 poles?
yes.
And, okay, so that's with each additional pole they need to put up as well? So it's net?
Yes, it is 5, yeah.
Net, okay.
Net loss, yeah.
Of the 5 poles that would go away.
Can you state your name for the?
I'm sorry, Dave Green, Apex Utility Consultants. Of the 5 poles, only 1 is visible on the frontage. The other 4 are down the property line, back kind of between the 2 properties.
Well, just a general comment from myself in reading this. I mean, I think my initial, I was reflecting back to one of the first meetings that we had where the underground and the lines came up for the residential lots on the south side of town, which I think presented a different type of a situation. And considering the location of this lot, I could see how and the fact that if the lot, in fact, has been vacant for the last 40 years, I don't know if that requirement.
I think he said 4, right? 4 years.
Oh, 4.
4 years.
Okay. I heard 40. Okay, so 4 years. Okay, now, then that's a little bit different. But for the last several years, I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not how much of a hindrance would be this requirement for development. especially considering I guess, for lack of a better word, the revitalization that's along the West Capitol that's taking place, if that would be a hindrance towards that. But at the same time, I understand the applicant's desire in which to splitting the lots and maintaining control of the southern lot, but then placing the burden of the undergrounding onto a potential buyer that then wants to develop that lot. To me, that seems like a relatively reasonable request, and I'm not sure if that's something that's part of the ask here, or am I off base there?
No, I think you're correct. It's not unusual for, especially in these smaller parcel maps, to have the buyer of one of the lots have these responsibilities. It's not out of the ordinary on a smaller parcel map like this versus a much larger subdivision where the subdivider would do almost all of that work and then sell lots. So as has been described here is not out of the ordinary. I think we heard the applicant indicate his willingness to go that way.
Commissioner Squires.
Yeah, another reason I'm interested in having the waiver, no to the waiver, is because I went out on West Capitol Avenue and stood there and looked up at the place where the poles down the east side come, and I looked up and down West Capitol each way, and there are no lines across the Capitol Avenue except right there. They come down that east side of the property and then go over West Capitol and then over to Service Glide area, Glide Avenue. So I would, and then hearing that the undergrounding would require it to go under Capitol Avenue, I like that. Another reason I think to not have a waiver.
Yeah, I think I agree with Commissioner Squires on this. Undergrounding should be the default, and the applicant has said he's comfortable with the requirement, provided that he can record it and pass on the requirement to whoever develops the property. It's just, if we always grant exceptions, we're never going to get any of these underground. So.
Just for clarification, make sure, because I think we're all on the same page, is that saying no to the waiver for so meaning that the undergrounding would still be required, but the burden shifts from the applicant to whoever the developer of said lot would be.
Yeah, that is what Mr. Tilley explained to us, I believe. It can be recorded and sold with the burden.
Whomever develops that property and whenever that happens, if you do not waive this, that will be their responsibility at that time.
I'm cool with that.
If there's no further deliberation, does anyone want to make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to approve staff's recommendation and to not move forward with waiving the underground utility requirement.
Okay. We have a motion by Commissioner Olivares.
I'll second that motion.
And a second by Commissioner Wong.
Commissioner Wong,
Aye.
Commissioner Olivares,
Aye.
Commissioner Squires,
Aye.
Commissioner Delgado,
Nay.
Commissioner Linker, Commissioner Jackson. My apologies, Vice Chair Jackson.
That's perfectly fine. I'm not in the titles. Point of clarification before I give my vote. So we're essentially what we're approving then would be the recording of the map with the note that the burden of undergrounding would shift to the developer instead of the applicant, correct?
At the time of site development, correct. So if this particular gentleman ultimately sells, then it will be the responsibility of that party to do it.
Aye.
Chair Sablon.
Aye. Okay, and with that,
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the city clerk within 10 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Okay, thank you, and good luck.
Thank you for being here today.
We have item 6, public workshop regarding annual zoning code amendments, and Mr. Baruman.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and all the members of the Planning Commission. My name is Daniel Baruman, Senior Planner for the city. I'm here tonight to present on the annual zoning code amendments. So this is a workshop, so no formal approvals will be made this evening, just for clarification. The zoning code requires regular updates to keep up with ongoing changes in the city. These amendments or changes are often spurred on by existing regulations that are no longer applicable, require updating due to changes in state law, or that requires process improvements based on input from the staff or the general public. A list of the proposed sections to be amended in Title 17 zoning can be seen here. There are a total of 15 proposed sections to be amended, with another possible amendment occurring based on feedback from the Planning Commission tonight. I will provide a brief summary of the notable amendments that I've highlighted. Beginning with amendments to tables. Table 17.09.020, short-term rentals in commercial and mixed-use zones. So the cleanup is made to make clear for short-term rentals that are not only permitted in residential zones by right, meaning no discretionary permits, but are also intended to be allowed by right in mixed-use zones based on the commercial nature of these uses. 17.09020, common open space standards in commercial and mixed-use zones. So the cleanup is intended to allow more flexibility with the use of common open space, since 100 square feet has been seen as an obstacle to implement recent mixed-use projects. Staff recommends 50 square feet per unit of minimum open space to allow more reasonable regulation for compliance, and this only applies to communal space. It does not apply to private open space. Moving on to amendments to chapter sections. Chapter 17.22.130, screening. The amendment is intended to promote more screening materials to be of a consistent aesthetic quality to avoid unappealing materials being used. So screening materials shall not be of a material that obstructs significant visibility, e.g. solid color tarps. This came to our attention from our code enforcement division based on their field observation. Moving on to 17.22060, fences, walls, hedges in non-residential zones for electric fences. So Title 15, buildings and construction, mandates that electrified fences be a minimum of 8 feet in height, while Title 17 states that the height of fences, walls, and hedges may not exceed 7 feet in height. So this is a conflict. The exception is added to ensure that both Title 15 and Title 17 of the Muni Code are in alignment when regulating the height of electric fences, with the exception allowing them to be a minimum of 8 feet in height, so in conformance with Title 15. Next is section 17.35130, appeals. The amendment is intended to clarify that the final hearing body for appeals of actions determined by the zoning administrator and the community development director, which would be the Planning Commission in this case. So decisions by the zoning administrator or community development director, the final decision body would be the Planning Commission. These may include lot line adjustments, determination on reasonable accommodations, business licenses, or other such matters. The option for the City Council to be the final hearing body is left at the discretion of any current member of the City Council and or the city manager. Several new definitions are proposed, including those for emergency standby generators. The proposed definition is intended to describe an accessory structure that is increasingly more common in residential zones. The amendment to Chapter 17.08.40, or supplemental regulations, is intended to regulate the placement of emergency generators in residential zones. The placement of emergency generators should follow similar guidelines to other accessory structures like swimming pool and spa filter, heating, and maintenance equipment. The other definition that we wanted to note would be that of smoke shops and liquor stores. The definition of smoke shops and liquor stores should be included in the list of terms and definitions to ensure that they are regulated accordingly as land uses. Further discussion of the mechanism of this regulation, whether they should be permitted by right or minor use or conditional use permit in certain zoning districts, will be explored in a subsequent update. And lastly, interim uses. In addition to the proposed amendments to Title 17 of the Muni Code, staff is interested in obtaining direction from the Planning Commission on interim uses on parcels that have limited development potential due to their location, size, or utility limitations. An interim use would be defined as a zoning action that allows a property owner to use their land for a limited period of time for a land use not otherwise permitted by the underlying zoning. A request for an interim use could be taken before either the zoning administrator or the Planning Commission in the form of a public hearing. The length of the use of this use would be determined by the staff with the final approval either by the zoning administrator or Planning Commission. The process for an interim use is envisioned to be like that of a conditional use permit in our current and described chapter 17.8, which is use permits. And here's just an example of a site. This is just an example of a site that we see on West Capitol that seems to be underutilized. It's zoned mixed-use corridor, and it could be a prime location for an interim use of some kind. It has sat vacant for a period of time and does not add a lot of current value to the city along a major thoroughfare. Staff hopes to come to you next month with a more refined list of amendments for your consideration and approval via resolution. This would later go to City Council for their approval via an ordinance. So this concludes my presentation on zoning code amendments. I'm happy to take any questions.
And thank you, Mr. Baroon. Any questions from the commissioners? Mr. Delgado?
Yeah, I have a question on the first proposed amendment regarding short-term rentals. Is this required by California state law that we expand this to other types of mixed-use properties?
It is not. No, it is just a recommendation by staff that it be included because of the commercial nature of short-term rentals.
Okay. And do we see any issue with that being new housing developments being turned into short-term rental properties, and then kind of, again, further exacerbating the affordable housing shortage in West Sacramento?
It's something that we certainly grapple with, but I think staff in our communication amongst community development staff, they feel like based on the nature of these short-term rentals, we think it's appropriate to expand it to at least the mixed-use, commercial and mixed-use zones, considering how it's defined in our.
Okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Squires.
You want questions or just comments?
Questions, comments,
Okay.
deliberation?
Yeah. Under item 2, open space standards in commercial mixed-use zones, I would rather not knock the 100 square feet down to 50. To me, it's just tightening up the whole subdivision even tighter and tighter. And I think about the children. We're called on as a planning commission and as a city to, what does it say? It says distribute benefits evenly throughout the community, further the overall objectives and policies of the general plan, not obstruct their attainment. It doesn't feel good to drop it down to 50. I think for the sake of the children, we need to have as much space as possible. It's already so tight. I mean, 50 square feet common, that's the front yard, right?
Well, that would be applied only to communal space. So private open space would not be affected by this amendment. But communal space, that would be in totality. So say there were 100 units, each unit would be obligated to have at least 50 square feet dedicated
And that would be
for
the front
communal
yard,
open space. Just any kind of communal open space within that project.
Okay, so you mean if there's a park somewhere, if there's a park within the communal, the whole project, the 50 could go there?
Yeah, the 50 would be applied to communal open space or common
Okay.
open space.
So you're cutting it in half? All the communal open space for the whole development is cut in half?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was brought to staff's attention based on some mixed-use residential projects that were having a hard time meeting that requirement. But we understand that, common open spaces is something that is desired.
Why were they having a hard time?
I think they just couldn't meet that amount of square footage space dedicated to common open space. I think they were just limited in that sense.
Are they trying to put so many units on that they?
I think that could be
All right.
a rationale. Yeah.
May I follow on that question? So you gave an example of 100 unit mixed-use residential space. Can you finish out that math for us, just so we understand how much common area we're expecting for that? Just go all the way through for us.
So that would be roughly, 5,000 square feet, I believe, per that 100 unit.
What's, I guess just to get an idea of, it struck me too, as we're cutting it in half, that seems kind of crazy, but what are the other cities doing? Like, what's the nation doing on this?
Yeah, it's something that we haven't explored yet. I think this came to staff's attention by other community development personnel, and they said, well, we're having a hard time sort of meeting the standard. This was a proposal, but this is great feedback. So I think having this input is important for us to understand. This is something that projects like these actually are it's a huge benefit to have common open space. But we received feedback that was sort of an impediment, an obstacle. So we wanted to see if we propose something, and it's certainly malleable. We can workshop this. This is a workshop, so this is an opportunity for us to look at what proposals make sense or not.
Yeah, I guess I think if it's going to be revised, just more on the rationale and why, and maybe some illustrations of this is what 75 looks like, 50, 100.
Sure. Maybe we can come back with examples in the subsequent meeting.
Mr. Squires?
Yeah, number 14, emergency standby generator. I didn't feel comfortable with the 5 feet, being able to put one 5 feet from the neighbor's house. I mean, if I was a neighbor and somebody put it 5 feet from my house, and I crack my window at night to get fresh air, and that noise would be right in there, 5 feet. I mean, even 10 feet is horrible, but I would rather see that be 10 feet or, something like that.
Good to know.
On that same note, would it be, it seems like that was something that could actually even have multiple definitions, considering the proximity of some of the lots, because I know in certain areas, certain parts of town, like one of the newer developments by me, the houses are almost 0 lot lines. So where that 10-foot, they don't have 10 foot to begin with. So if somebody wanted to put in a generator there, it wouldn't be possible. So maybe if there's a way to be able to differentiate distances or the requirements for, I don't know, either by lot size or housing size or something like that. Because as far as I know, there is one house in my neighborhood that has a standby generator, and I'm jealous because I want one at my house, but I just won't put it on.
No, thank you for that comment.
I mean, for the emergency generator, we're talking about something that would only be on in case of emergencies, right?
Correct.
It's not something that's going to be running 24/7, 365?
Correct.
Okay. Is there minimum or maximum size that we define an emergency standby generator as?
No, we did not define a particular size for emergency generators, but we
Okay.
certainly can add that if we so choose.
So anything from like a 5 horsepower thing you'd pick up at Home Depot to whatever you could get that's industrial?
Right, like the Generac that you
Okay.
normally see, it's, something in the neighborhood of 12 square feet or something like that.
Thank you.
Any discussion on the interim use? I think staff was specifically looking for some feedback on that. Oh, did you have a question on something else, Commissioner Olivares?
Yeah, I'm kind of in consensus with my fellow commissioners in that I think that what would possibly bring more value add to the report that staff provided is, I appreciate that there's the description or the definition, the summary, but we don't really see the challenge or the information that was provided to city staff that ultimately led to the advancing of the zoning language. And I'm all for continuous improvement. And I do believe that if there is intended need, whether it be by law or, stakeholder feedback, that's great. We want to improve in these areas. But I think in order for us to make a collective informed decision, if I'm hearing my colleagues correctly, we may benefit from seeing that highlighted in staff's report. Is that information already made available to staff and something that could be easily plugged in if we were to come back at a later date?
Yes, I believe we can provide more detail when it comes to sort of the rationale behind some of these proposals.
Okay.
So yeah, we can certainly effort to provide that for the subsequent meeting.
And again, that's just my thoughts, but if collectively, if my fellow commissioners think that that would be of value, I have no problems, making that recommendation to city staff.
I'm just going to pause for 1 second. Do we have public comments on this item? Okay, we will come back to additional comments from the commission and open up for the public comment.
Thank you, Chair.
Bradley Elkin.
Good evening. Was it Elkin or Elpin?
Yes, Elkin, E-L-K-I-N, Bradley. I am an attorney with Diepenbrock, Elkin, Dower, McCandless in Sacramento. And thank you for giving me a couple of minutes before the commission. I represent a landowner on West Capitol. His name is Rick Mandela. And he has a LLC that owns property on West Capitol. It's called RRM LLC. It's his initials, basically. So he owns 3 assessors parcels, 3 addresses. There's 2700, 2750, and 2800 West Capitol. The property has been in his family for generations. At the 2800 site is a gas station that his father actually originally owned and operated. It's leased to a separate operator now. The 2750 site is used for sales of manufactured housing. That's a grandfathered use. It's been that way for many years as well. And the 2700 lot is basically empty. It's a paved lot. It's under the MUC Mixed Corridor Zone based on recent amendments. And the reason I'm here today is because we've been meeting with Mr. Tilley on and off for the last number of months, because the current zoning, which is even more restrictive than the previous zoning, is a major impediment to him putting primarily the empty lot and then the lot that's got the manufactured housing on it to any productive use because of what it requires and what its limitations are. So we understand from the recent zoning that it's intended to provide areas for a mix of higher density residential that supports retail and office uses. I'm just reading from the zoning there. But in order for him to put these lots to any kind of productive use, to generate revenue, to generate taxes, would require a substantial capital investment that the market just won't bear. So he's looking as hard as he can and has presented numerous times and been defeated numerous times, informally and formally, to be able to put the bare lot, the paved lot, to some sort of a productive use that isn't really allowed by the zoning code. So he's asked for opportunities to put some sort of a trucking business on there, RV sales and auto sales, just a truck driving school, truck sales, truck rentals, and he's been basically thwarted every time. The neighboring uses, are you going to kill me on time here? Can I have an extra minute or two?
We'll give you an
Okay,
extra
thank you.
minute.
So the neighboring uses, to the east, auto repairs and services; to the west, truck equipment, restaurants; across the street, an Econo Lube, Meineke Car Care, fast food, and a strip center. Behind is basically kind of it's an older mobile home park. So the reason I'm here today, because I know this is a workshop, we're looking at the potential omnibus amendments, and I wanted to advocate in two ways if I could. Number one, we have sent a couple of letters to Mr. Tilley asking if, as part of the amendments, we could expand the list of permitted uses in this zone to something that would be productive for what's basically a paved lot. And then I know also what you've got is this interim use, which would be helpful if it would allow us to be able to put interim uses on there that aren't technically allowed by the zoning. Because we're workshopping it, we want to make sure that the time frame for those interim uses is not just so short we've effectively undermined them anyway, because for someone to come in there and want to put some sort of a use on site, they need to know that they're going to have some amount of time to establish themselves there. So really, we're asking again, if you're workshopping, if there's a way to direct or ask Mr. Tilley to expand the list of permitted uses in this zone to the types of things we put in our letters. And then if you're considering the interim uses, that we make sure that we're not conscribing the time so narrowly that it effectively is not going to allow us to put a use there anyway. I'm happy to take any thoughts or questions, but that's mainly why I'm here, because I know you're workshopping and we want to get our thoughts into the omnibus amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Elkin.
Thoughts, questions for me?
I have a quick question. Can you give us an example of one of the recommendations you put forward? Just so we can attempt to visualize what kind of zoning?
Sure. In our letters, we asked for some sort of vehicle sales or rentals, because it's just a paved lot. So these aren't things that would require any kind of construction. A technical school. Just recently, we have a party that wanted to lease the site just to run like a trucking school where it's almost all just instruction on site, but they would have to bring some trucks on. Just so they can show them how to start them, how to do them, how to get their safety checks before they leave, and then they would just drive off and go off on the road. So, and they actually submitted for a business permit. They were declined. So it's just one in a string of ways that my client has not been able to put the property to any kind of productive use. But there's a fair number of things you can do with a bare lot. I know the previous applicant for the parcel map kind of described our same problem. He's had a lot that's been basically unusable for years and years, and he's trying to figure out how to make use of it, and he's continually not being able to put it to use. His solution is to split it and maybe sell it and have someone else develop it while he keeps half of his property. But that, like, we're in the same conundrum where we've got a bare paved lot that we can't put to any use, can't generate any income for the landowner or for the city. So that's what we're hoping to do, to give us a pathway to do that.
Commissioner Squires.
Did Mr. Tilley give you any suggestions of what would work on the property? If you gave him a long list of things that didn't work?
He has been sympathetic to the problem. He asked us to submit a letter with some uses that we think we could lease it out to that would put it to productive use, kind of for a paved lot, which is why we submitted the letter. He told us that there was these omnibus amendments in the works, and that perhaps we could expand the permitted uses. So right now, the thing before you in the workshop is just like a one addition to the permitted uses. We would love to get that expanded to the things that we want. And then he also said that we were working on perhaps some sort of a streamlined interim use methodology, because I understand the long-term goal. You don't want to put something there that will undermine the long-term projections. But the zoning code that went in place that's hoping for this high-density residential, et cetera, has been in place for a long time, and that path of development is not happening. So some of these landowners are sitting there unable to put their property to any productive use because the zoning has a goal, but the market's not grasping on and embracing that goal yet. So now these lots are just kind of sitting there to no one's benefit. And there are a lot of people, I think the last guy said, there are a lot of people that come around and ask, hey, could we use your lot for this? Could we use it for that? Could we use it for this? And we just keep getting thwarted every time.
So there's nothing, there's zero that you could use that lot for?
there's things, the things that he could use a lot for that are in the zoning code, permitted uses by right, are almost all require some sort of capital investment that people, I mean, the economics don't pencil. You're not going to, the types
Okay.
of things that are allowed would need to have some sort of a substantial capital investment, some sort of building that wouldn't generate the return in revenue at this time.
So he doesn't have enough money to develop the land?
He doesn't because
the way-
he's just kind of a private owner. It's just, he's
Okay.
not a developer. He's a guy his family's owned the property for years and years. Like I said, his dad ran the gas station there and they've had the property. So he's not a developer. And I'm not sure there would be a developer that would be in a position to put that much money into the capital investment that would generate a return on that site as it sits right now in this market. So that's where we
Okay.
are. So again, I think if you're doing this workshopping, they're looking for, I think, some guidance from the commission. So we would love it if you'd guide them to expand the permitted uses to these types of things that we put in our letter, and certainly give them the interim use authority. And I know it said that the time for the interim use would be sort of at, yeah, I think it would, staff would recommend it. Maybe it's coming to the planning commission. We just want, it can't be a year. Like, no one's going to sign up for a year to put their business there and just to say, go away. But I understand you want to be able to move them on when the residential development dream finally takes root. So you don't want to put something there that's going to be there for a long term, but it has to be there long enough, that the interim use has to be there long enough for it to make commercial sense, if that makes sense. So thank you. We would appreciate anything and everything you can do.
Thank you, Mr. Elkin.
Yeah.
We have no additional requests to speak on item 6.
Thank you. We'll close the public hearing with that. Any deliberation on this discussion, feedback for staff on the interim use?
Yeah. Mr. Bruman, my question to you is, it seems a bit vague and unspecific at this point. Does the staff have a recommendation for maximum and minimum amount of times for these interim use permits?
I don't think there's a specific time that we were absolutely recommending, but I think if we were to kind of project things out, something like a 3 to 5 year period would be reasonable.
In certain other contexts, we've certainly provided for an opportunity to re-up that based on what's happening around. I think Mr. Elkin put it well about remaining faithful to the long-term vision and not doing anything here that would further delay getting there. I mean, 1 year is almost nothing in some ways, so we certainly wouldn't be looking at something, that short, but trying to find that sweet spot between not too short and not too long. Right now, riffing, I'm thinking in the 3 to 5 year range with the option to potentially extend that if the market conditions aren't there yet to where we can get to kinds of uses that, the general plan, which does take a long-term view on things, envisions, not just on West Capitol, but potentially elsewhere in our community. Vacant lots I agree that vacant lots are really not good for anyone. And as I think what we heard tonight on this particular item and the item before us is a conundrum that many communities face, which is, do we take what we can get now, or do we continue to wait to get what we really want, knowing we don't know how long that may take, and we don't know if we'll ever get it. So it's a real conundrum that comes up a lot in what we do, because we all would love to see the grand vision of West Capitol happen and happen tomorrow if we could. But we recognize that, it's clearly still a ways out there on West Capitol and in some other parts of our community that we've had, long-standing plans for, and it took a while. The Bridge District was one of those areas. The earliest planning work on there was done in the early 90s, and it wasn't until 2010-ish before things really started to happen out there, as an example. But at least the vision remained in place and stuck to, and we eventually got there. But it clearly took a while. And that may be the case elsewhere in our community. It's market-driven in this business more than anything else.
And just following up on that, so the many of these vacant lots along West Cap are zoned MUC, right? Mixed use corridor. So I believe the interim use permit says we would allow a property owner to use their land for a limited period of time for a land use not otherwise permitted by the underlying zoning, so not necessarily MUC. How far off of that, those permitted activities are we looking at going?
Well, this is not without risk. And so I think we'd be most interested in those kinds of uses that could make use of the properties more or less as they stand now, would not require a large investment such that that party would need a long time to try to recoup that investment. The pre-manufactured home sales businesses that have been out there for many, many years are kind of a good example of that, because they could almost be all gone in a day if somebody wanted to purchase one of those properties and redevelop it with apartments or whatever it could be. So so uses that could make it would also not be impactful, because we do have residential behind many of these properties on West Capitol and elsewhere, so we need to be mindful of that. And I think the most important thing would be types of uses that wouldn't require a lot of startup costs to get going, and hence there wouldn't be a big investment that would need many, many years potentially to recoup.
Okay.
I guess if we did these interim use, is there potential, if the market starts turning and we have people that want to develop our dream of West Capitol, are these uses going to be a deterrence to them of, we don't want to be next to a truck lot or whatever it may be?
Well, I'm going to opine on that a bit. I will ask Mr. City Attorney to as well. We do need to work on what the mechanism will be to authorize these interim uses, such that when the time does come for them to, move along in favor of, more favorable market conditions, we do want to make sure that we do have a robust ability to make that happen.
And that's where the finite term would come in. And depending on how we would phrase the re-upping that Mr. Tilley referred to earlier, we would have control over that then and be able to kind of look around to see whether or not it's worth renewing, or if the market conditions in that particular area have changed enough to not renew it. But the whole concept behind this interim use permit is to give us that kind of medium-term flexibility to have some economic use on the property while still maintaining that long-term vision for the development in that area.
And are there legal risks with doing these interim use permits? If you have an interim use that becomes profitable, are there going to be issues? I mean, even if we say it's 5 years, is that really?
If we say the permit is good for 5 years, then I think we would stick with that, but we'll need to be very careful in how we phrase those permits.
Yeah, I would be in favor of seeing this expanded further, with more detailed language and more specific guidelines for how we plan on proceeding.
I agree with Commissioner Delgado. I think there needs to be a well-thought-out, documented plan that should come before the Planning Commission that provides some sort of a framework that we can kind of visualize to some degree what the intended use of these interim permits would entail for the city at large. Just another quick question on that. When city staff are preparing some of these proposals, and/or staff reports that do come before the Planning Commission, are we also overlaying that with the strategic principles of the city of West Sac and kind of where our, using that as a guiding roadmap as to how we put these proposals in front of the Planning Commission prior to going to City Council?
Yes, absolutely. We want to make sure we're in compliance with the strategic goals and the general plan. And we want to make sure our proposals are in direct alignment with that.
Thank you. I think that that would equally allow for us to make more confident decisions, knowing that what we're deliberating here has that overarching bigger picture in mind to better set up our city council members for success. So with that, I will say if my colleagues continue to be in consensus, if we could ask city staff go back and augment more on staff's report and provide us with some of those challenges to some of those zoning provisions that are requiring updating, as well as in support of Commissioner Delgado's comment, if we can have a more robust plan on the interim use permits, come back before the Planning Commission. I think that may better set us up for the next step in our decision-making process, but I'll defer to my colleagues.
Commissioner Squares.
I have a question about the interim use. I can see how you could get electricity onto the property for a little office or something, like for a truck place. But what about water and sewer? If you just have a vacant lot, how does that work for them? I mean, it seems like some development would have to take place.
Yep, some sites may have utility connections like that already, some may not. But certainly, if there's any construction on a site, they will need to connect to domestic water and sewer. So even an interim use may involve, some level of cost in that regard. Some of those things, are really largely unavoidable. Yeah. What we would hope to avoid is, major investment that would mean somebody may need to be there a long time.
Any further comments from the commission? Yeah, so I think you've gotten comments on some of the specific amendments and the interim use, and I think with the interim use, it's being mindful of the time, and it sounds like you already are, and just making sure those uses that we would propose for interim uses are compatible with the long-term vision, so we're not deterring people that want to come in for the MUC and from coming in while there's interim uses.
Absolutely. And one of the other questions I had, and it was something that we discussed among staff, is whether this should go through a zoning administrative process or a planning commission review, a la a conditional use permit. From what I'm hearing, just the sense is I think this would be likely a planning commission reviewed use. So if there was a proposal, I think the planning commission would likely be the body that would make the determination. But it's certainly up to the commission to decide that if you feel as a body that it might be best handled on a zoning administrator level or through the planning commission. It's really up to the commission.
Yeah. Sorry, I really appreciate that comment, and I would say this: any expert analysis or input that you can gather and garner prior to completing the proposal and bringing that before the Planning Commission, we may be able to accomplish the two-prong recommendation that you provided. Is that something that could be done, as opposed to splitting hairs on that thought?
Yeah, I think that notion is something that we can flesh out a little more. As the city zoning administrator, I'm definitely leaning toward having these be more of a planning commission consideration. But we will provide you some pros and cons on that. But at this point, at least, for me personally, I'm leaning toward planning commission consideration of these because of the potential implications if we don't get it right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing back from you on this item. We are Nothing on the regular agenda today. Administration function part 2. Any commissioner communications? Seeing none, we are meeting in
We
2
will
weeks.
see you in 2 weeks.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.